That is a type of liberty. It is a type of liberty. And what about justice? What's the definition of justice? Is that part of our Tea Party today? These were founding principles. These were the principles of our founders.
There's a very deep cynicism about justice anymore.
There is, because we don't understand what true justice is. It's been mocked by our federal courts, our justice system, our injustice system, if you will. But these were ideas that were very important to our founders. So let's start at the beginning, which we were at. You have this fill out. Jamestown and Plymouth. These were the two colonies, first two colonies in the United States. Okay? Jamestown was founded in 1607 by the London Company with a charter they procured from King James. And yes, that is the same King James who authorized the King James Bible. Plymouth was founded in 1602 by Puritans and Pilgrims, Plymouth was Pilgrims and Puritans who also were at Massachusetts Bay. This is why we had the compact. They didn't get along. Does anybody know who the Puritans and the Pilgrims were? Like what they were about?
The Pilgrims were total separatists. They didn't even use King James's authorized Bible. They used another one from Geneva.
That's right. They were both religious reforming groups. The Pilgrims wanted to change the church, leave the church and change the view. The Puritans wanted to change it from the inside. So these two didn't get along very well. And because they had disagreements, part of what they dealt with was part of how they dealt with those disagreements was through the Mayflower Compact. Have you ever? And this is a great document to read the entire document. It's very interesting. This is the first civil government we have. Then after that comes the First Great Awakening. George Whitefield and John Edwards, which I spoke about. Sinners in the hands of an angry God. This is where the law comes in. Their understanding of justice and liberty dealt with the justice that they read from or heard about in church. Most of it, the law, the first 5 books of the Old Testament.
The Torah.
The Torah, that's right. In a sermon that George Whitefield, I was just talking about this, he also talks about what it means to be a leader or a governor or in the assembly, to represent the people with justice. Unjust. That is what the founders were believing their government, the British government, was. There were many acts that were passed that led to the Boston Tea Party. And a very good understanding of how unjust they thought these taxes were. It was not the amount of taxes, by the way. It wasn't that they were taxed enough. It was that they were taxed at all. Parliament had no right to tax them. They understood that. I have a copy of this if you want to read it. It's a great thing. You can find it, the resolution of the Stamp Act. Congress of 1765 is a Congress here in the United States responding to the king regarding the Stamp Act. So they dealt with the Stamp Act. Now this was very interesting. Does anybody know what the Stamp Act did? The Stamp Act, yeah, you do.
Well, if you wanted to have a legal document like a will or a contract, you had to buy a stamp to pay for it.
The lawyers got really upset with this one.
Well, you couldn't do any contracts or wills. Or
That's right. No wills, no contracts. The Sugar Act. The Sugar Act taxed sugar coming into the United States from the Indies. The Quartering Acts. Anybody aware of what the Quartering Acts? You do.
Yeah, when they said to enforce these various acts, like there's also the Navigation Act. The Quebec Act was the first one that upset them. That after being granted lands west of the Mississippi, west of the Alleghenies to the Mississippi, and then fighting in the French and Indian Wars to preserve them from the French Canadians, then the King of England gave them to Canada, to Quebec, and that upset them. That was the first thing. But to enforce all these rules like the Stamp Act and the Tea Act, they said they're going to send troops over, and they said you've got to put the troops in your house. You have to quarter the troops in your house. That's what it actually meant. You must keep British soldiers in your home. You must supply them with food and necessities. And the Stamp Act, the Tea Act, the Quartering Act, the Navigation Act, the Quartering Act taxed sugar coming into the United States from the Indies. The Quartering Acts. Anybody know what the Quartering Acts? You do. Well, if you wanted to have a legal document like a will or contract, you had to buy a stamp to pay for it.
How would you like President Obama to call you up and say, Mr. Ames, welcome, you need to welcome into your home a member of the military who is there to police your actions?
Not gonna happen.
Or maybe a member of that ready reserve medical corps.
Exactly. So there was the Boston Tea Party, which was over unjust taxes. And then because of the Boston Tea Party, we have the Intolerable Acts. These were several acts that basically closed Boston Harbor. It said that British soldiers would not need to be tried in America for crimes they committed. They could be tried outside of America, the colonies. It also, again, enforced quartering to a more hefty degree and placed Boston under military rule. This is what we're about, packed enough already. My concern is that if that's all we're about, we're not going to really impact the restoration we want here in America. Because taxes, well, it's a great slogan. Oops, why? Go back, no, it's a great slogan. It is not, it is a reaction, not a revelation. How did we start? We started to react to an administration that wanted to steal our liberty. But it wasn't really a revelation. It hasn't been, we haven't looked at, we are talking now about restoring our country, but how do we do that? How do we restore our country? When the climate of today's citizen is so different, the mind of today's citizen so different than the mind of those who actually started this nation. The understanding of liberty and what it meant, justice and what it meant. The things that were important to the founders, these foundational ideas. We don't even understand what justice is, as Mrs. Ames told us a few minutes ago. It almost is, the idea of it scares us because we have no true understanding of justice. Or liberty. What is liberty? What is liberty? How would you define it?
Freedom to determine your future.
Okay.
Can you repeat that? I couldn't hear the answer.
Freedom to
Determine your future. Is that it?
Well, I think also it would go without saying that the framers understood this within the limits of morality. I mean, you know, freedom to be a drug dealer wasn't in the cards.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, exactly. I mean, there's liberty, but what are you going to do with it? How are you going to be responsible? They understood that justice had to be balanced with liberty, and this is where I think we haven't seen justice and liberty. Liberty also has to be balanced with justice. What do you think when you see those two ideas? It's you have the liberty to live your life as you see fit. But if you harm someone, there needs to be justice. Justice to see that the other person gets to live their life as they see fit without harming another. And this is about personal responsibility. And it's something that we need to teach the generation coming up. We were fortunate enough to have parents who taught us about personal responsibility, who taught us that liberty didn't mean doing what you wanted to do. It meant doing what was good for you without harming someone else. We do not live in a society, or we do not see that in the generation below us. I haven't. Have you? So if we fight this revolution and restore this nation, are we going to give it into the hands of people willing to work? Because this will take more than my lifetime. It will. It took more than the founders' lifetime, really, to see the nation truly at the glory that they expected to see. So are we ready? Have we trained up our children? Are we trained enough in the true understanding of American history, where the foundation actually comes from, to be able to hand it off? Some ideas about, oh, there you go. Here are some ideas, and you'll notice the quotes. As I was looking at the ideas of the founders and what they saw as important, when it came to, let me see, is that the right one? Yeah. Well, personhood. Everyone's life is to be secure. These were the quotes that are found in their notebooks. If you're not sure what that is, EX is Exodus and DT is Deuteronomy. Everyone's life to be secure. That's the life part of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. False accusation. They had a real issue with this. They believed that everyone should be secure against slander and false accusation. These were some of the notes that they had. Punishment. Everyone is protected from cruel or excessive punishment. Another note. Their foundational law begins. Dignity. Everyone's dignity is to be honored and safeguarded. And in fact, this section of Deuteronomy is what debt law has been based on for years. After 7 years, you're released from your debt. The idea of bankruptcy laws, they all come from here. Property. Everyone's property should be secure. Thou shalt not steal. The fruit of labor, that everyone should receive the fruit of their labors.
Lincoln quoted. Lincoln used that.
Yes, that's right. Fair trial. Everyone should be given free access to the court and is afforded a free trial. And actually, in this area, and some of these notes are how they decided to set up the courts. Moses set up the first trial court system in the recorded history that we know of. He set it up by picking officers out of the tribes and out of officers of tens, 50s, hundreds, and thousands. Representative government. And no one, and this was very important to them, no one, not even a king, is above the law. It's very interesting when you start looking at original source documents. Oh, all these, by the way, these were Thomas Jefferson's notes. You know the deist, Thomas Jefferson? These were his notes. Then they had an idea of representative government. Because their question was, if we had justice and liberty, but the people had no voice in this political atmosphere, how would they be protected? So they understood that they needed a representative government. They knew from Montesquieu, you guys familiar with Montesquieu? Montesquieu, they needed divided government. Montesquieu never really talked about it being representative. So and Thomas Jefferson, everything I'm actually writing about is that I'm note-taking is pretty much about Thomas Jefferson. It's his notes. Thomas Jefferson spent his life looking at governments, and in fact, when James Madison was getting ready to go to the what became the Constitutional Convention, the first meeting, he sent a bunch of books that belonged to him on political history and governmental history to James Madison. Those books had, of course, his notations in them because people wrote in books back then. Thomas Jefferson spent his life not only reading but learning the languages, the original languages of the manuscripts of which he read. So he read Greek, he spoke Greek, he could read classical Greek, he could read Latin, he could read French, he could also read Hebrew. He could also, so where in history did our founders find an example of representative government? They actually found two. Ancient Israel and the Anglo-Saxons. I don't know if you have studied ancient Israel under Moses in the wilderness as they're coming out of, and in fact, it's very interesting. Thomas Jefferson writes some very interesting notes about how he sees the parallel of Israel leaving the bondage of Egypt and America in fighting for her independence away from the bondage of England. He writes very fascinating information. And the Anglo-Saxons, he actually taught himself to read Anglo-Saxon. An amazing man. Do you know what these two are strikingly familiar? The Anglo-Saxon government also was set up in families of 10, a leader, a representative for a family of 10, from that 10 for 50, from those 10 from 50 families, a representative from 50 families, 100 families, and 1,000 families. So we kind of see how Congress and our government is meant to be set up. And it was meant to work with the closest, or the group closest. The family of 10 handle the problems of the family of 10. If you can't, bring it up to the head of the family of 50 families. If you can't deal with it at the 50 family level, bring it up to the 100. So everything was supposed to be